You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. You probably saw this earlier today, if you haven't yet, but we kind of threw it out there on social media. New mock draft is out over at SI from Luke Easterling. He's got Jaden Daniels all the way up to number 11 overall. Clearly, there's a lot of people here who are going to be ecstatic about that. Probably a lot of people in the Daniels household as well to see that news. But Luke Easterling's good enough to join us to explain why. Luke, we appreciate the time, man. How are you?
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. Thanks for making time. Okay, let's just start with the obvious. That's a pretty meteoric rise for Jaden Daniels. Why do you have him all the way up at number 11?
Well, one thing I'll say about it, too, is it's even more impressive when you look at the rest of the quarterback class, right? Because this isn't one of those quarterback classes where you just got one or two guys at the top and then there's just nobody else, right? I mean, there's a long list in that second tier. You do have those top two guys. You do have Caleb Williams. You do have Drake May. But after that, there's a lot of other guys who could make a really strong case to go in the first round, maybe even the top 10. And I don't know, man, when I look at Jaden Daniels, I see a similar playing style, a similar playmaking ability, and a similar kind of advancement in his development, particularly as a passer, that we saw from Lamar Jackson in his last year at Louisville. And if you kind of look at the way they play the game, they're tall guys, but they're not big guys. They've got a little bit of a leaner frame, so there'll be some questions about his durability and ability to stay healthy at the next level. But obviously the explosiveness as a runner is there, like we had with Lamar. And Lamar made a really big jump in terms of his ability as a pocket passer, his ability as an accurate passer on the move that last year at Louisville. And I think that light has clicked on for Jaden Daniels this season, where he's made the jump as a passer. He's still as dangerous and explosive as a runner. And I think one of the biggest things that people may forget with him, this is a guy who has played a ton of football at the highest level, right? 53 career starts under his belt. He started a ton at Arizona State and started early in his career, right? So he's been a starter really the whole time he's been at the college level for the most part. And when you have that going for you, when you've seen every type of game, you've seen every type of defense, you've played in multiple schools at a high level in Power 5 conferences, I feel like that entire resume and the development we've seen with him, it's not just a splash play here and there. It's not just the fact that he had such a ridiculous game against Florida. That stuff plays into it. And when you do the historic things that he has done, and when you can say, I'm the only guy to ever do X, Y, or Z, that obviously matters. But I think when you really look at the totality of his body of work, it tells me that's a guy that I'd feel comfortable taking a swing on in the top 10 as a franchise quarterback.
Where did you have Jaden before the season started, just for context?
I mean, I would have had him as a day 3 guy. I think he would have been a fourth round and on. Maybe at that point you're going to take a flyer on a guy because, again, you saw the athleticism and the explosiveness, the playmaking ability, and you saw some of the flashes as a passer, but the consistency wasn't there. You wanted to see the consistency from the pocket, outside the pocket, throwing on the move, in addition to the running ability. I think that's what we've seen literally on a week-to-week basis, regardless of the opponent. He has played at such a high level. And obviously the doubters will come in and they'll say, the same thing they've said about a lot of quarterbacks. He's playing with these great receivers. He's got Neighbors. He's got Thomas. He's got this talent around him. At the end of the day, you still got to make the throws. You've still got, we'll talk about great receivers not having a good enough quarterback and criticize them that way. Why can't we just look
at Luke Easterling from Athlon? He's got a new an SI, new mock draft is up there. You can get it at SI.com. We tweeted out the link a bit ago. He's got Jaden Daniels 11th overall. But as you mentioned, the 4th highest mocked quarterback, Drake May 1, Caleb Williams 2. That was interesting. But you also got J.J. McCarthy 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons. Why?
I mean, honestly, the interesting thing about how these quarterbacks are going to be slotted, the record is 6, right? The famous 1983 class.
Sure.
I think there are probably 6 guys that could make a case to go in the first round here, and it's going to be about style and fit. So if we assume that the offensive scheme is going to stay the same in Atlanta, that Arthur Smith's still going to be there, I think the transition from what J.J. McCarthy is doing in the Michigan offense to an offense that's going to be pretty run-heavy. Obviously, Michigan was very run-heavy this past week. And a guy that's going to work off play action. He's a good athlete, too. He can make some plays with his legs as well, but he's going to be accurate. He's going to be efficient. may not have the top end, playmaking ability or arm talent that May or Williams or even the explosiveness that a guy like Daniels has. But I think the totality of it, he's a very well-rounded player, even if he doesn't have the high ceiling that some of those other guys do. I think his floor is really high. And I think when I'm looking at a mock draft, I'm looking at the specific team, who fits this offense better. And I thought McCarthy was a good fit there. I mean, just purely talent and ranking based, if I'm Atlanta, if I'm any team picking in the top 10 and those top two quarterbacks are off the board, that quarterback conversation has to include Jaden Daniels. There are a couple other guys in there. I think Bo Nix would be in that conversation. I'm a huge Michael Penix Jr. fan from Washington. I know his health, his injury history, multiple torn ACLs, some shoulder injuries. He could easily be off some teams' boards completely just because of the medicals, but I'm telling you, when he's healthy, he reminds me obviously a lot of Tua Tagovailoa. Yes, he's left-handed, but he's a guy that, injuries are going to be an issue. But when healthy, he's proving that he can play as well as any quarterback in the country. So the quarterback conversation always drives the draft debate. And this year is just going to be so fun because there's so many talented quarterbacks.
Luke, I also noticed that you didn't have Shedeur Sanders or Quinn Ewers in your first round. Is that because you're operating under the assumption that those two players are returning to school, or would they not be first-rounders on your board?
Yes, I am operating under the assumption and the expectation that those guys are going to be back at their respective schools in 2024. And so if that were not the case,
yeah,
I've been a really big Shedeur Sanders fan most of the season. I'd love to see him with an offensive line that could keep him protected. My favorite thing about Shedeur Sanders is he's got physical tools and he can do the things you need to do as a passer. But I just think that kid's got it between the ears. I think he gets it. I think nothing is too big or too, pressure packed for him. He's very patient, and it looks like the game moves very slowly for him, and he's able to make decisions when he's able to have time. And I'm excited if he does come back to kind of see him take that next step and maybe even be the potential number one overall pick next year in a very different quarterback class that I don't think will be as deep or talented. If he were in this class, though, he'd be in that conversation, that top 10 conversation. Quinn Ewers is a little bit difficult for me. I think obviously you've got the arm talent. You can push the ball down the field. But, again, I talked about consistency with Jaden Daniels. Consistency is this thing I still want to see from a guy like Quinn Ewers. And injuries are also a big part of that, too. He's missed a decent chunk of games in each of the last two seasons with injury. So he's got to prove he can stay healthy as well. I think that's if he ultimately comes back to school, that'll be part of what he wants to prove, is that he can stay healthy for a whole season and prove himself to be a top 10 prospect.
I got a couple more for you. Luke Easterling is our guest on Twitter, at Luke Easterling. Give him a follow. He's got a mock draft up right now over at SI, where he's got Jaden Daniels going number 11 overall to Tampa. I mean, you couldn't get him out of the NFC South. I mean, all the Saints fans here, like, none of us want to see Jaden Daniels stay in the NFC South if it's not New Orleans. Let me ask you two more. I wanted to ask you about Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., so that's sort of a two for there. You got Neighbors at 22 overall to Dallas, and Brian Thomas 32 to the Eagles. Maybe a thumbnail on both of those guys and why you have them slotted where you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's way too low for Neighbors. I'll say that right off the bat. I got to the 20s in my mock draft, and I'm like, how in the world are like these three guys available? And again, it speaks. I talked about the depth of the quarterback class. The receiver class is even better. The receiver class I think the record is 7, right? I think it was 2004, the Larry Fitzgerald year, where they had 7 guys. I mean, this receiver class could easily put 7 or 8 guys in the first round, and I'd be fine with it. You've got, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. at the top. But after that, it's really, the next 3 guys I feel like are interchangeable. I'm a big Rome Odunze fan from Washington. I like Keon Coleman from Florida State. But Malik Neighbors is right in that conversation. If any of those 3 guys also went into the top 10, I wouldn't blink at all. And I think really what Neighbors brings to the table, that he doesn't have the size that the other 2 guys do. Odunze is 6'3". Coleman and Harrison are both 6'4". But he is so smooth, man. He is so great and explosive after the catch. He's so hard to bring down. He will break tackles. He's a great route runner. He's a very smart wide receiver. So seeing him at 22, I felt like I did him a disservice. I was like, there's no way he's going to be on the board this long, and I don't think that'll be the case. And Brian Thomas is kind of going in the opposite direction, where guys wouldn't have necessarily considered him a first-round pick. But when you really look at it, I mean, a 6'4", 200-plus guy that can run like he can. Obviously, there's some polish that you need there as a route runner and kind of the intermediate routes and the more complex routes. But, man, he can take the top off the defense at that size. Reminds me a little bit of Quentin Johnston, who we saw go in the first round out of TCU this past year, and a guy that may take a little while to get refined. But, man, those physical tools and that explosiveness, you just can't teach.
right, last thing for you, Luke. We are obviously here in South Louisiana, tons of Saints interest as well. So I wanted to get one in here where you got the Saints picking 19th overall, going offensive line, which is something that they sure love to do, for better or worse. J.C. Latham out of Alabama, they obviously need tons of help on the O-line. Why does that make sense at 19?
I think part of it was value. He's a guy that I routinely find in the top 10, top 15 at worst. And when I saw him still there on my board when I was putting this one together, it just made too much sense. And he's also a guy that I think could play potentially either left or right tackle and might even be a better guard than a tackle. I mean, he's 6'6", 340 or 350 or something. I mean, he is absolutely massive and moves way quicker and way more easily than you would expect a guy that size to move. So, when I look at the fact that really across that entire offensive line, you're looking for the best player and the best upgrade at really any of those spots. And I feel like Latham's versatility, his athleticism, his power and strength, if you could plug him in at either tackle spot, and again, probably would even be a Pro Bowl guard right away, that made too much sense with him being on the board and that being, I think, the biggest need there for the Saints.
He is Luke Easterling. Follow him on Twitter at Luke Easterling there with Athlon and SI. Luke, we appreciate a couple of minutes, man. I'm sure we'll bother you again somewhere down the line.
Hey, can't wait, man. Thank you guys so much.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.